question for you. If you've ever wondered if there's a way where you can actually do Krumphau, the crooked cut, more regularly in sparring or even in tournament, then this is the video for you. All right, hi, today, Jeff Tsai, Forte Swordplay. So I want to talk to you about Krumphau, the crooked cut from the German tradition, and what we have learned from looking at this for the better part of 20 years. One of the things that I have noticed is people don't often use it as regularly as they could. And I find for myself, I actually use this as one of my primary, if not my default, parries actually for this tradition. And there are things that I have to do in order to actually make that happen. And that gets to fundamentals. What are the fundamentals we use in order to make Krump practical, repeatable and practical in both sparring and also for tournament? So a little while ago, there's a series of like 4 videos that we put out on our fundamentals. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. Put that in the description below. But the thing out of there that I would want people to pull is a couple of specific fundamentals, right? So one is about the footwork, and that is specifically the idea that every time that you step, every footfall, every footfall has the potential of having a blade action that goes with it. So stepping while you cut and cutting with every step as much as you can is one of those things that is really, really helpful with Krump. The other is cutting patterns, right? So we introduced these sort of cutting patterns, and notice I'm taking a step and a cut, step and a cut. And so you see this X that I'm doing, right? So here I'm cutting through the X, but I can also run off. This is the running off pattern where I cut and I run off. I cut and I run off. And we'll see that this pattern with footwork is going to be critical to what we do today for Krump, okay? So to kind of move into that next piece for Krump, those 2 pieces, what we're going to adjust today is the following, which is when I cut from my left, instead of stepping with my left, I'm actually going to step with my right. And vice versa. And this is what you end up with. Okay? And you'll notice, as I cut here, if there's something that's coming from this side, I'm going to engage that with my blade. And when I step, I can actually step here, or I can step here. I can step anywhere to my right, right? So again, I can adjust all of those things, coming forward, coming backward. And I can also add a lean into it to give myself extra distance. If I want to double it, I can do that. And notice again, because it's 1 step per blade action, that can be very smooth and very quick. And the final thing is you'll also notice I'm not doing, right? Every time I have to stop, that's a real bummer. That's a real bummer in terms of the momentum, the speed, all of that. So 1 blade action, 1 step, running off, and making sure that you try to do this in a continuous motion. Those are sort of like key elements that really help you make Krump really usable and repeatable. The next thing that I want to get into is the nuances of the short versus long edge, right? So you'll notice with this pattern, everything I showed was kind of from the long edge, but you can absolutely include a short edge variation of that, right? So here's long edge, and with the feet, it looks kind of like this, right? So I'm gonna now use the short edge, long edge, short edge, long edge, right? So that's actually a nice exercise. You've never done it before, but it kind of, and actually one other thing to point out, with short edges, right? Long edge, there's kind of 2, right? There's this one, crossed hands, this one, uncrossed hands. So you'll notice if I try to do that same pattern with the other short edge, it really doesn't work, right? So long, good short. And then if I go this way, and I want to use that same pattern, I have to then reverse the other way. Same thing here. It's not built. That short is not built for that particular pattern. Okay, so really, long, crossed hands short from the right, uncrossed from the left. Long, crossed, uncrossed. Long, short, short. And if we want to kind of just bring the camera in a little bit, just so that people can really see, here's the long version, long edge, short edge. And obviously with the long edge, you have more reach. Sorry, long, long, short. This is shorter, but there's some structural advantages. You can be stronger when you're doing the short edge ones in some cases. So that gives you a sense of the mechanics. And so it kind of begs the this other point about, with these different variations, are there any preferences? If you look at the various sources, and this is kind of a general comment that I think is worth making, not just for Krump, but for things in general. I find, usually when they're talking about a topic, say Krump, different sources will say different things. And you can kind of take that one of two ways. It could be that, one person says Krump has to be one way, and another source says Krump has to be another way. But more often than not, I find that they're often just variations of a common approach. And that's what we're going to be trying to present here today. Like, what is a common, fairly universal framework for thinking about what Krumphau is? And if you take that and then look at all these different sources, you will often find they're just sort of various variations that different sources are either saying might be preferential, right? But to think that one source's Krump is very different from another source's Krump, I think would be a mistake. And so one of the really good reasons to look across sources is so that you get a bigger picture. So this next step here is to talk about the tactics that sort of naturally arise when you are thinking about, if my opponent cuts in with a Zornhau or a diagonal cut from the right, I'm going to match that with, again, not from my Zornhau from the right as well, but in fact, this same plane just slightly on top if I can, right? So if we just kind of, yeah, right. So that's the pattern, the default pattern that I want to do. But tactically, there are a couple situations that can happen. The first is if I'm lucky enough that he actually presents his hands as a target first, then I'm just going to, again, cover. But since the hands are right in the way, I'm going to go ahead and cut with the long edge or the short edge. Or, when we're playing and just being nice, we can just do it with the flat. Right? All of those are doable, right? So as that comes forward, I just clip them and be on my way, okay? So that's option number one. Krump to the hands if that is a option. Number two, if he presents his weapon first, as he should, right, then you want to Krump to the flat, right? And so we'll get into nuances of this in a little bit, but primarily you want to get your edge on the opponent's flat, right? And not only that, you actually want to almost shave on the way down. And what you'll get is effectively what, like, modern Olympic fencing will call an expulsion, right? So it's not just a beat, it's not just, right? But it's actually, right? So I'll do it a little bit slower. I get contact early as I can, and continue all the way down and basically bleed all of that energy away if I can, right? And all I'm trying to do is match the cutting angle, but just stay on top of it slightly, okay? So, and you'll see, that blade really kind of shooting away. This is one of those things that I find really easy since I've been doing this for a long time, but it does take some time to practice, and we'll actually, after this, show a little drill on how you can actually kind of work on this. So that was technique number two, right? Krump to the hands if they're available, or Krump to the blade if that's what gets presented. Now, the angle of the blade is super important, because really at kind of like anything from a low angle up to a diagonal angle, you want to sort of like get away from it and step, right? So this is where, you know, really springing away. If he's really aggressive and he's coming in really, really deep, right, you're actually going to want to spring back and away. But if for whatever reason I can actually get in on him, and you got to be sure that you have the distance to do this, but like I can also aggressively spring in and do that sort of thing, right? So, and this, by the way, I think this is why depictions of Krumphau can vary. Again, this is why you see potentially one of the reasons you see variation. I can actually spring forward, to the side, or backward, right? So a forward-looking Krump can look like this. A sideways or backwards one can actually look like this, right? Talhofer, actually, as I recall, has a really good example of this. While like there are a lot that actually look this way. So again, it's not because they're different Krumps. It's about range control, right? So that's a simple way to explain that. That all being said, right? So when we're dealing with anything from kind of low up to a diagonal, this is a pretty surefire way to basically just cover it. I'm going to do the same exact thing every single time. That being said, there's an opportunity that can present itself if he starts to cut, because if you're dealing with the situation, you're expecting your sword to just keep getting pushed down, really expelled down, and leaving you pretty open. So if you're trying to avoid that, you might actually sort of like start coming up further and further to sort of prepare yourself to not get pushed down. And if that happens, if the blade starts to get really, really vertical, this can happen. And if he keeps coming, so you get this situation where you are covered, and at the same time you're covered, you can hit. And also notice what I did with the feet, right? If we do this really, really slow, I was going to do this, but when I noticed that I can go from this side to this side, I finished that with a second step going forward. So covered to his shoulder, head, ear, whatever you want to aim for. And the other thing is that it's somewhat transitional, right? So it's not just boom and I just plant it. I can also here keep going, right? So again, this is one of those things that I really encourage people to think about. Don't think about like a finishing move as like finishing and the person's dead. Maybe they're dead, maybe they're not. You want to have a motion, you have a tempo, an action that you're planning on continuing to do after that, okay? So again, those three tactics: hands if you can get it, blade, or short if he's vertical enough.